Yeah, and for better or worse, there's minimal break time between these two games, so they're thrown right back into the thick of the action. Firouzja needs to recover at a moment's notice. Magnus feeling a lot more comfortable. You can see it on the camera. He's back in the zone, and it's the Italian game, Robert. I can confirm I did have some pasta for dinner last night, inspired by all of those Italians we saw. And wow, what do you make of this opening choice? Bring the bishop out early to g5 in a must-win situation.
I think it's a good call from Alireza and a better call from Magnus, not pushing his G-pawn, as is the case in many Italian games when your opponent brings the dark square bishop out with a pin. So instead, Magnus, he brought his bishop to C5, then back to E7. He wastes a turn, so to speak, but it's to keep the foundation of his position solid. Do not give Alireza the type of aggressive play that he so desperately desires.
Yeah, Magnus just trying to lock things down. We mentioned he will try to suck the life out of this position. He won't want to allow it to explode, to become fun. But Firouzja, he has this uncanny knack of making positions exciting later on, making them really complicated. Sometimes it backfires on him. We've seen that in that previous game. But Firouzja, if he can somehow make it happen when Magnus least expects it, he does stand a chance. Right now, rook to E1. Feels like Firouzja's in preparation. Look at the clock times. Magnus pushes a pawn. He's next going to move the king out of the eye line of the white light squared bishop. And it might be on the king side here, Robert. Firouzja needs to strike, and soon, in the center.
As you said, the knight can jump out to h5 to put some pressure on this bishop on g3. So the idea is clear now from Magnus. And he was a bit lacking in space. In particular, his bishop on e7, that's staring into its own pieces. So he is trying to create new avenues for the rest of his pieces. I love the move g6. It's a very smart play. Now for Alireza, do you continue with natural development? Knight c3, maybe even knight to d5 if the black knight ever moves? Or do you save your bishop, David, with a move like h3? It's a bit calmer, it's quieter, but it does keep the game going in a way that Alireza may want.
Yeah, I like pawn to h3, creating a nice escape square for that bishop on h2. Also preventing one of black's main ideas if white breaks out in the center. I would love to play pawn to d4, open the middle of the board, control the middle of the board potentially, but pawn to d4 here might run into bishop to g4, pinning and at least causing some discomfort for white. So pawn to h3, a multi-purpose move, you call it, Robert, on the board now. And Magnus, he might not have time to play on the king side with his f-pawn. He plays rook to e8, a bit inconsistent, but he's trying to get ready for the white d4 pawn push, which looks imminent, might even happen now on this next turn. And bishop to f8, very passive. Viewers at home might be wondering, the freestyle challenge, the freestyle goat challenge starts in a couple of days. Why is he putting all his pieces back on the back rank? But Magnus just trying to get organized. He's trying to improve the scope of his rook.
And the bishop will come to g7, where if d4 is played, it will have a longer diagonal to work with. This was the cost of Magnus Carlsen's opening. It wasn't just time, it was shutting the door on activity for the dark square bishop. And this bishop on c8, we typically tell you not to move the same piece multiple times. This dark square bishop has moved 3 times. The bishop on c8 hasn't moved at all. Eventually, it can go to a square like e6, but there's no rush for it because that bishop, its future is not evident. Bishop e6 doesn't want to sit there, doesn't want to sit on d7 a little bit more quietly. These questions are not easy to answer, so Magnus punts on the decision for now.
Yeah, and look at the clock time as well. Already, it's still early days. Both players in preparation until recently, but Firouzja just looks like the slower player right now, maybe in his own head a bit too much, thinking about the match situation. Bishop to h4 though, Robert. That is the definition of provocation. He's trying to pin. He's trying to force Magnus to lash out with a move like g5, but that's never going to happen. Magnus is never going to open up his king in a situation he just needs a draw. Bishop back on g7 now. Looks really solid for black. How to break this formation? It's not easy.
I like the idea from Alireza. As you said, he's trying to provoke g5. Magnus wants no part of that. He does not want to push pawns in front of his own king. He wants to ensure its safety. So what next? That is a huge question. In order to start going for ideas and trying to take advantage of squares, you sometimes need to move pawns, create pawn breaks, and open up files. But a move like d4 is now the right time. Now that the black bishop is sitting on g7, it looks difficult to accomplish, and that's why we see the knight into d5. So, David, black is responding. Magnus, all of his moves, they're logical follow-ups to White's choices.
Yeah, really logical moves from Magnus, just improving pieces. But finally, I think he might have to answer the question, what next? This last move, pawn to c3, indicates that White has covered pretty much every square on his first 4 ranks. Queen to b3 was in the air, hitting on the queen side. Magnus trades off, Robert, and this is a really committal decision. Black's light squared bishop was one of the pride and joys of his position, covering all the light squares. We talk about the Italian opening, the Spanish opening, White's light square bishop as well on his side, the pride and joy. And now it's uncontested, this piece. To my eyes, this looks like a favourable trade for White. Do you think Magnus has something specific up kind of in store for us?
Well, he pushed his g-pawn. That's not something he wanted to do, but it allowed him to get that light square bishop back. So Black's pawn structure on the queen side is doubled. Isolated a5 pawn. That could be a target later on. And you've pressed forward on the king side. But Magnus's claim, David, is that his king is safe and sound because there are no white attackers in front of it. So is this pawn a5 a weakness? I would say absolutely, but difficult to get to. It takes a night journey to reroute and get there. I like White's position, I have to admit, but I think that Magnus, he's not unhappy to be here.
Yeah, Magnus has advantages of his own, including this really strong black knight now sitting on f4. And will he score? That's the big question. The black knight now solidified, and Firouzja desperately trying to undermine it. If black now captures in the center, pawn takes d4, I think Alireza here, he would leap on the opportunity of removing that black knight from the board with his bishop, forcing black to break the pawn chain. Really ugly structure there. So I don't think Magnus is going to get hasty. He will want to keep the tension instead. But this one's building, Robert. It feels like it's really starting to come to life. The real fireworks in the near future. But right now, there's enough imbalance. There's enough hope for Firouzja. And yeah, I'm liking what he's doing. He's at least got a position. He's got a game, and he's alive in this final.
And Black's pawn structure is not getting any better anytime soon. In fact, if White takes on e5 and Black takes back, we see double isolated c-pawns in addition to the isolated a-pawn. But Magnus, he is counting on activity and play against the White king. And Alireza, he does have the long-term advantages. So, David, I would say that as this game continues, the advantage is in Alireza's favor just because of the pawn structure. But the dynamic play is in Magnus's favor.
Yeah, Robert, I'm going to ask you to do one of your favourite things, to move some pawns to squares that unfortunately they cannot go to. If a black pawn were on b6 instead of c6, if black's pawn were on g6 instead of g5, then black's structure would be perfect. So harmonious, no double pawns, isolated pawns, no weak squares in your camp. But now the f5 square is a huge target for the white knight to get into later. The black queenside pawns just right for the picking in any endgame. Any endgame, actually, White's simply going to win. You can create a pass pawn on demand on the A file. So Magnus, he won't be able to rely on his endgame trickery anytime soon. Definitely long-term advantage White. And I like the fact Firouzja has sped up in what is his second Champions Chess Tour final. 6 minutes on the clock against 7. That's closer than it has been for a while. So definitely shaping up nicely. What do you think, Robert? I'm going to ask you now, put you on the spot. Will we see Armageddon today?
It's funny because I was about to ask you a question. I was going to say, doesn't it feel like Magnus's position is more of Alireza's alley, where Alireza's position is more Magnus style? So in regards to the Armageddon, I actually think it's quite likely, just because Magnus, only needing a draw, may have to play forcefully, and that's not comfortable when you want to play solidly to try to get that half point.
Yeah, Magnus will not be feeling comfortable in this situation. I've known Magnus a long time, and he really dislikes it when long-term he's suffering, when he has these ugly pawns and needs to compensate by showing real kind of energy and to kind of gamble in a way. And he is trying to gamble now. Bishop to c5. Robert, given a question mark, it drops a pawn. It's a big sacrifice, a committal sacrifice. Knight takes a5 is available for White. Is greed good here? Does Firouzja jump in and just call that bluff? I guess he's got to be worried about his king side, but does Magnus have anything concrete against the white king? I must confess, I don't see it. I don't see any justification. Surely, if he wants to win this match, there we go. He does get greedy. He snaps off the pawn, and Magnus goes in. G for glory. Will he win this game? What do you make of this? Can White fend off the attack?
I think that Alireza is just in time. We talked about hooks, that G4 push. If there was something attacked on F3, would have pried open the white king side. But for now, everything is under control. H4 is a good move. If black had a queen on G6 already, then G3 becomes a deadly threat thanks to bishop on C5. But that seems quite a ways away, and white will see it coming, slide the king to the corner, and then maybe even move the bishop out to G3. Not now. Bishop G3 would simply blunder a piece. But in the future, the move bishop to G3, if the king is not H1, seems to have white's position looking safe and sound.
Yeah, king to H1, one of the first moves you mentioned, and then a bishop on G3. It looks like an unassailable fortress, and one that's actually cropped up in a lot of classic games throughout chess history, especially if white puts a bishop on G3 and that bishop's captured by the black knight. That pawn shelter, that pawn formation of pawns on G2, G3, H4, just no way through. White's king will live 1,000 years in the corner, kind of on the H2 square. So Firouzja, I think he's doing everything right. I think Armageddon is a big favorite in this one. Magnus does need some real magic in order to save this game. I don't see it. White is simply going to come back with the knight to C4, start pushing the A pawn or the B pawn. Full control, queen G3, queen F6, I was going to say, met by bishop G3, guarding everything. And this pawn formation, wow, Robert, I must admit, I missed this one, but Magnus allowing an endgame despite how bad the black pawns are.
Counterintuitive to trade queens when you're down material. All of our coaches taught us if you're trailing, you want more pieces on the board because endgames will not be favorable. But Magnus spots that the pawn structure may collapse very quickly with a bishop on F2 also hitting this rook on E1. So very clever attempt from Magnus, and Alireza says, I'm not afraid, let's go. Outside pass pawns usually rule the day in the endgame. He brings his rook behind the B pawn. It gets a question mark. I am ridding us of that question mark. That is a good decision. I think Alireza is fully in charge.
Yeah, he is dominating this game. We said it earlier, any endgame favors white due to the power of the passed pawn. The white A pawn is likely to win this game. And I'm going to call it Alireza the A pawn. It's going to start sprinting forward very, very shortly. Magnus, though, what's he pausing about? Surely he has to snap off the pawn on G3 before it disappears, before the white king steps forward and defends it. He's a pawn down after all. The C6 pawn is collapsing. Look at those accuracy levels. Firouzja playing one of the games of his life. So important here. And he's playing so well, Robert. So strongly. And Magnus, okay, desperately trying to mix it. Pawn to F5. We see the eval bar not approving, not liking this move. But he's desperately trying at least a source of counterplay, a source of light at the end of the tunnel for the black E pawn. Is there a way to stop it running? That's the big question.
Looks difficult to stop. If the pawn captures on F5, which seems to be a natural try, there it goes. The bishop on F2 helps it out as you just rush the E-pawn up the board with the rook behind it for good measure. So Alireza right now, he sees how dangerous the position is. David, can he just grab this C6 pawn with his knight and then work around what will be an annoying E-pawn passer that black will try to turn into a queen?
I think he can. I think Alireza could get away with it, but that would, as you mentioned, allow counterplay. The move I would want to play here, if it works, if you can calculate, is rook to F1, just to try and take the black F5 pawn with your rook, kill the counterplay before it even begins, kill it at source, and if you can somehow kick the black bishop out of the way, take that pawn, you're just loving life. Black has no passes. Black can basically resign. The only complication is the fact that black might be able to play a move like bishop to b6, hitting the white knight. You have to work out that it all kind of falls into place. I don't see any reason not to, though, Robert. Bishop b6, I think you can just meet with knight takes c6 in that position. We're spitting out some variations, but this is all that's going through Firouzja's mind. He does not want to allow Magnus a glimmer of hope. I'm predicting rook f1. I think that's what he's trying to work out. He does not by nature want to allow any activity. Oh, wow, he just plays b4 instead. Whoa.
And that move, I actually think, deserves the question mark. Your rook f1 idea is well taken. It would have prevented black from getting this passed pawn. And f takes e4 certainly looks like a nice try. Bishop takes g3 at any moment is going to potentially win the h4 pawn. But David, this position, they don't have the evaluation bar by their side. They're going on their own. Magnus doesn't know that he suddenly has an opportunity because you play a move like pawn takes e4. I think that Alireza is just going to take this pawn at c6, pushes b, pushes a pawns, and those are hard to stop as well.
Yeah, still super difficult for black. As you say, Robert, correctly, the eval bar is not available for the players, so they know the momentum, the trend of the game. It's all been about white. Alireza is the one who's made things happen, who's got the long-term advantages. Magnus is in hustle mode, and there we go. What a move. Really classy move there from Magnus Carlsen. The white e-pawn, it's not running away anytime soon. Black's e5 pawn is the one that he wants to push down the board, but it needs support from the black rooks. And this black rook that he just moved was about to get kind of semi-trapped. Now it's going to spring forward. First, he gains time against the white knight, which is defended. And now 2 passed pawns, double pawns all over the shop, Robert. Whose are more dangerous?
I would be thinking rook to b4 just to go after these pawns in the 4th rank, but the e-pawn is the one you need to stop. And of course, black will push it forward, and then again, and then one last time before it becomes a queen. So I would be super nervous here if I were Alireza Firouzja. The evaluation bar is at zeros. Neither player knows that. But I would say more than anything, it's become a game with all 3 results on the table. It looked like one-sided traffic. Now Alireza Firouzja is probably worried about how he continues because the e3, e2, e1 push is so obvious.
Yeah, Magnus Carlsen. I'm going to eat my words. I thought he was almost out of it. I thought he was devoid of any active counterplay whatsoever. But pawn to f5, that was just pure genius. Just giving him practical chances. And suddenly you can see it on the camera visibly. Firouzja is nervous. He realizes it's no longer within his grasp necessarily. He still needs to play really well and just to fend off Black's active play. He's given the opponent a clear-cut plan. And that is the cardinal sin of rapid chess. 1 minute 30 against 4 minutes. Suddenly it's an uphill struggle. Suddenly Armageddon is a distant dream. Rook to b4. I love it, Robert. He plays it, Alireza. He is going for those black pawns, those weak pawns. And he's going to at least be able to stop from behind the forerunner, the black e4 pawn, if it steps forward. But where does Magnus now seek counterplay? It feels like it's just a totally irrational endgame. Really hard to evaluate.
Irrational is a good word, not maybe necessarily in life, but for this position, because rook takes g4 is check. White currently has 6 pawns, black has 5. It's actually hard to count them because you see that they are all scattered. They're mostly isolated, and after rook takes g4, black will be a pawn down. So I would take this pawn on g4 and then try to bring my rook back to e4 to freeze black's pawns before they run forward. This is looking like a position where Magnus needs to prove that he can hold the half point. And whoa, as soon as I say that, the wrong move from Alireza and the blue arrow is in, David. Rook d2, and Magnus isn't just okay. Apparently he's winning.
Wow, Alireza missing the opportunity to grab a pawn for free with check. I'm not so sure about that one. He maybe was afraid of taking that pawn, allowing the black king closer towards the center, but of course Magnus jumps on that opportunity. He finds the move indicated by the blue arrow, exclamation point. E2 is coming, followed by rook to d1 check, and you're landing, you're touching down. That black pawn is going to become a new queen. It's coronation day almost, not just for the king, Magnus Carlsen, but for that e-pawn. Alireza, he lost control. He allowed too much counterplay. And suddenly, hard to even find a move, Robert. It's inevitable. You can't stop Black's plan.
And I wonder what the difference was, because a turn ago, it was all zeros, and rook takes g4 that you could have stolen a pawn. I don't know why that would have changed the nature of this position. Rook f1 played. Black can, in fact, push the pawn to e2. You'll get this rook for a bishop and pawn. I wouldn't actually want that just yet. Can Black slow down? David, can Black be extra greedy, protect this bishop first, and then push the pawn next? Magnus does it.
Magnus does it. We saw that look on Magnus's face, that kind of momentary, like, that confusion, that frown. Why not? Why aren't I just winning right now? And I think it's starting to settle in. It's starting to kind of become real for both players. They know Alireza now down to 10 seconds. Nothing he can do. Pawn to e2 wins a whole rook. This might be the last few moves of the Chessable Masters 2024. Pawn to e2 looks automatic here, Robert. Why not? The black bishop's defended. Nothing to do. Alireza looked away. 4 seconds left. Is this the final moments of the tournament?
It is Magnus Carlsen. He needed a draw, but he gets a win, and you can see that he is relieved. He's happy because Alireza Firouzja gave him everything he